This is Lab 8.1, create a horizontal and vertical analysis using XBRL data for S&P 100 data in Microsoft Excel Part 2. In the first part of this lab, you worked with XBRL facts and created a pivot table to show those facts by company ticker and by account name. And then in your sheet, you tested this by looking up a value from the pivot table. Now we're going to create a dynamic statement that allows us to change these values over time. So if this first sheet was for part 1, let's create a new sheet. We'll call this one part 2. In this case, we're going to fill in a template for different data that we want to have. So we're going to put in the company, and then the year, period, and the scale. And these are values that we'll be able to change to look up individual values. So for my company, I'm going to put in Microsoft MSFT for the year 2020. The period is going to be the year, so it shows the annual report. And then the scale is what I want to round this to, in this case, 1 million. Now we can start building our financial statement. So we'll begin by putting in years in columns B, C, and D in row 6. In this case, I want this to equal my year, B2. And I'm going to move this a little bit, so I want to lock my B column. To create a absolute reference here, we'll press F4 on our keyboard 1, 2, 3 times. So we end up with $B2. And that means if I move or copy the cell, it'll remain in column B. Go ahead and press enter. That'll give you 2020. In C, I'm going to say equals B6 2020 minus 1, which will give me 2019. And in column D, I want to take C6 minus 1. So now I have a 3-year period, 2020, 2019, and 2018. For my rows in column A, I want to copy and paste the different accounts that we see in the lab. I'm going to go ahead and paste in those values. If you'd like, you can resize the column so you have a little bit more space to work with. And we're going to use the getPivot formula to look up values from our pivot table again. So in cell B7, I'm going to put in the formula equals getPivotData, open parentheses, and I'm going to look up the value from my pivot facts table. So pivot facts is the name of the tab down here. And I'm going to put an exclamation point because I want to reference a specific cell where my pivot table is located. In this case, I'm going to put $A, $3, because the cell A3 contains data from my pivot table. Next, I'm going to reference fields here. So I'm going to put in the ticker, and I want to match the ticker to the value in B1. Now, when I move this formula over and down, I want to keep that locked in B1, so I'll press F4 to put a $B, $1 to give that an absolute reference. I'll put comma. The next dimension I want to compare is my year. So put my year in quotes, and I'm going to match this with B6. In this case, when I copy the formula down, I want to keep it in row 6, so I'll press F4 2 times to lock row 6. Then I'm going to look up my account. So my account, comma, is going to match A7, revenue. In this case, when I pull the formula over to the right, I want to lock it to A, so I'm going to press F4 3 times, so we get $A7. Close the parentheses, then we're going to divide this by our scale, B4. Press F4 once to lock that in place. So double check your formula. It should match what's available in the lab. And you'll know you've done this correctly if you press return. You should see a numerical value that it's pulling from my pivot table. If you don't see a number here, check your spelling on the different formulas and your quote marks, as well as the references to the different cells. Now, if you've done this correctly, you can drag this cell down, B17, and it's going to compare this and look up the values for each of the different accounts. 2020. Drag this group of formulas over to 2018, and now we'll see the values for all 3 years for Microsoft. We'll grab these values. We'll go ahead and make these dollar values. So we'll click on the accounting number format. And we don't really need the cents, so I'm just going to decrease the decimal to get rid of those. Once you have your statement here, go ahead and take your screenshot And now we'll do a little bit of analysis. To compare our trends over time, we're going to insert a visual that is a spark line. It's a little simple visual that fills a cell and shows the change in data. So if we go to cell E7, we can come to the Insert tab. And over in Spark Lines, we're going to choose Line. And for the data range, we want to select all of our revenue values, so B7 to D7. Then click OK. Here you can see the trend increasing from 2018 or decreasing from 2020. And if I drag the spark line down for all these accounts, you'll see the trend for each of those individual accounts in a nice, concise, compact graph. Now to perform a vertical analysis, in other words, to see how many cents are dedicated for each dollar in revenue to costs and income, we're going to take our year headers from B6 to D6. We're going to copy and then to show the proportion, in F7, we're going to type in equals B7, which is my revenue, and we're going to divide this by B $7. Since we want everything divided by revenue, we're going to lock that to row 7. So when we drag this down, we'll stay set. Go ahead and press enter, and it should be 1 because that is 100%. Now we'll drag this formula down, and we can see what percentage of each of these cost accounts or income accounts are related to revenue. And then we can drag this whole block across for the 2 years so we can see how that proportion changes over time. Let's hover over all of this and change it to a percentage. And we can increase the decimal place to show a little bit more precision for that. Finally, we can grab our spark line. We'll just copy my column E over to column I, and you can see the trend. Notice in this case that the trend for the raw dollar values is not always the same as the percentage trend that we see here. Once you have these analyses, go ahead and take your final screenshot. And the whole point of doing this exercise is that we have a dynamic statement. So we can come to our company and we can change this from, say, Microsoft to Cisco, CSCO. And it's going to dynamically update the income statement from the data from my pivot facts table. Go ahead and answer the lab questions, and that concludes this lab.